Dear listeners, welcome to this delightful, cozy mystery audiobook, Miss Marple and the Vanishing of Lady Dorsett, a Miss Marple story. Inspired by the timeless tales of Agatha Christie, join the ever-observant Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a puzzling disappearance in the quaint English village of St. Mary Mead. Pour yourself a cup of tea, settle into your favorite armchair, and let the charm of 1950s village life whisk you away. This story unfolds over 10 chapters, each about 8 to 10 minutes when narrated at a leisurely pace. We'll begin right after this brief pause. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Disappearance at Dorsett Manor. In the heart of St. Mary Mead, where the seasons turned with the gentle predictability of a well-wound clock, the summer of 1952 unfolded in a tapestry of green meadows and golden sunlight. The village, nestled in a fold of the English countryside, was a place where life moved slowly, governed by the rhythms of church bells, cricket matches, and the soft hum of bees among the honeysuckle. Cottages with thatched roofs lined the high street, their gardens spilling over with roses and lavender, while the air carried the faint, comforting scent of freshly baked bread from Mrs. Bunce's bakery. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or so they thought. Until the morning when Lady Amelia Dorsett vanished without a trace. Miss Jane Marple, an elderly spinster with a mind as sharp as her knitting needles, lived in a modest cottage near the village green. Her days were filled with simple pleasures, tending her small garden, where sweet peas climbed trellises, and knitting intricate shawls for the church bazaar. But her true talent lay in her observation of human nature, honed over decades of watching the comings and goings of St. Mary Mead. Her blue eyes, framed by delicate spectacles, missed nothing. Not the flicker of a glance, nor the hesitation in a step, nor the unspoken tensions that simmered beneath polite conversation. That morning, Miss Marple was pruning her roses when the first whispers of trouble, the news, and returned to her roses, her mind already turning over the details. People did not simply vanish. Not even in a village as peaceful as St. Mary Mead. There was always a reason, often tucked away in the ordinary, like a mislaid stitch in a pattern only she could see. By noon, the village was abuzz. St. Mary Mead, for all its charm, thrived on small dramas, and the disappearance of Lady Amelia Dorsett was no small matter. Dorsett Manor, a grand Georgian pile on the village's northern edge, was the seat of the Dorsett family, whose wealth stemmed from land and investments in the city. Lady Amelia, a striking woman in her late 40s, was known for her elegance and her patronage of local causes: the flower show, the library fund, the restoration of the church's stained glass windows. Her husband, Lord Henry Dorsett, was a reserved man, more at home with his account books than village society. Their marriage, while outwardly cordial, was the subject of whispered speculation, particularly after Lady Amelia's recent trips to London alone. Miss Marple decided to pay a call at the manor, ostensibly to offer her sympathies but also to observe. She donned her best tweed skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a straw hat adorned with a single silk rose, then set off down the lane, her walking stick tapping lightly on the cobbles. The manor's gate stood open, and a small crowd of villagers lingered outside, murmuring among themselves. Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, a plump woman with a penchant for gossip, was holding court near the gatepost. "It's dreadful. Simply dreadful," Mrs. Price declared. her voice carrying over the hum of voices. "I saw Lady Amelia last night at the garden party, radiant as ever, in that lavender gown. And now, poof, gone. I wouldn't be surprised if it's those London types she's been mixing with." Miss Marple approached, her smile gentle but her ears sharp. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Price. A troubling affair, isn't it? Did Lady Amelia seem herself at the party?" Mrs. Price's eye. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat. "It's good of you to come. It's a proper puzzle, this is." He led her into the drawing room, where Lord Henry Dorsett stood by the fireplace, his mustache twitching with anxiety. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice strained, "this is a nightmare. Amelia was here last night, laughing with our guests. Now her room's empty and we found nothing but her scarf on the lawn." Miss Marple settled into a chintz-covered chair, her eyes scanning the room. The French windows which opened onto the garden were slightly ajar, letting in a breeze that stirred the heavy curtains. A silver tea tray sat on a side table, its cups unused, and a vase of freshly cut roses perfumed the air. "Tell me, Lord Dorsett," she said, "when did you last see your wife?" "After the party, around 10 o'clock, he replied. "She said she was tired and went upstairs. I stayed to see the guests off. This morning Elsie found her bed untouched, save for the covers being slightly rumpled." "And the scarf?" Miss Marple asked. "Silk, lavender, one of her favorites. It was near the rose garden, caught on a bush. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. It's as if she simply walked out and disappeared." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the windows. "May I see her room?" The bedroom was a study in elegance. A four-poster bed with crisp linens, a mahogany dressing table laden with silver-backed brushes, and a wardrobe filled with gowns. The French windows here, too, were open, their latch loose. Miss Marple examined the sill, noting a faint smudge of dirt, barely noticeable. On the floor, near the bed, lay a single pearl earring, its mate missing. "Curious," Miss Marple murmured. "A woman like Lady Amelia would not leave without her jewelry. And yet, only one earring remains." Elsie Watkins, the maid, hovered nearby, her face pale. "Milady was particular about her things, miss," she said. "She'd never leave." Groan, and whispers followed her. "What does Miss Marple think? She'll get to the bottom of it, mark my words." She smiled faintly, accustomed to the village's faith in her. But this mystery, she sensed, was more tangled than most. Lady Amelia's vanishing was no accident. It was deliberate, and someone in St. Mary Mead knew why. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple brewed a pot of Earl Grey and settled by her window, her knitting in her lap. The village spread before her, peaceful, yet hiding secrets. People are like gardens, she mused aloud. Beneath the tidy surface, there's always something stirring. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting golden light across the cobblestone lanes and the ivy-clad walls of Dorset Manor. The village, still abuzz with the morning's shocking news of Lady Amelia Dorsett's disappearance, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next revelation. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted slightly against the afternoon glare, walked purposefully up the manor's gravel drive. Her visit was, on the surface, a gesture of condolence, but her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. The way the roses in the garden leaned under the weight of recent rain, the faint scuff marks on the steps, the nervous flutter of a curtain in an upstairs window. She was met at the door by Elsie Watkins, the maid, whose pale face and fidgety hands betrayed her unease. "Oh, Miss Marple," Elsie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's kind of you to come. The house feels all wrong without m'lady." Miss Marple smiled gently, patting Elsie's arm. There, my dear. A cup of tea will steady us all. Is Lord Dorsett at home?" Elsie nodded and led her into the drawing room, a grand space with tall windows overlooking the rose garden. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax polish and fresh flowers, but an undercurrent of tension lingered. Lord Henry Dorsett stood by the fireplace, his tall frame stooped as he stared into the empty grate, his mustache noting the heavy velvet curtains that swayed gently in the breeze. "The scarf was found outside, I understand. Near the rose garden." "Yes," Lord Dorsett said, his brow furrowing. "Caught on a bush, as if she'd dropped it in a hurry. But there were no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Constable Craddock's been over the grounds twice." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her knitting bag. "And no one saw her leave? No guests, no staff?" Lord Dorsett shook his head. "No one. It's as if she vanished into thin air." Before Miss Marple could press further, the door opened, and Arthur Findlay, Lady Dorsett's nephew, entered. He was a handsome young man of about 30, with dark hair and a restless energy that seemed ill-suited to the somber mood. His tailored suit, slightly rumpled, hinted at a life of fast cars and faster spending. "Miss Marple," he said, offering a strained smile. "I didn't expect to see you here. Any news?" "Not yet, Mr. Findlay," Miss Marple replied, her tone kind but probing. "I understand you were close to your aunt. How was she last night?" Arthur sank into a chair, his hands fidgeting with a cigarette case. "Aunt Amelia was, well, herself. Charming, gracious, but maybe a bit distracted. She promised to help me with some financial troubles. Debts, you know, from my time in London." His cheeks flushed slightly, and he looked away. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Financial troubles can weigh heavily. "Did she say anything specific about her plans?" Arthur hesitated, then shook his head. "Just that she'd sorted out. She was always generous, but she could be sharp if you crossed her." Elsie, who had been hovering near the tea tray, set down a cup with a slight clatter. Miss Marple's gaze flicked to her, noting the way her fingers twisted in her apron. "Elsie, dear," Miss Marple said. "You mentioned Lady Dorsett was distracted last night. Did anything else strike you as unusual?" Elsie's eyes darted to Lord Dorsett. "Private." Arthur shifted uncomfortably, lighting a cigarette. "Aunt Amelia was always getting letters, charity requests, invitations. Could have been anything." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind cataloging each detail. A letter, an argument, a scarf. These were not mere coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle, and she suspected the picture they formed was far from simple. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Constable Craddock entered, his notebook in hand and a look of mild frustration on his face. "Miss Marple, Lord Dorsett," he said, nodding to each. "I've spoken to the ground staff. Old Hobbs, the gardener, says he saw nothing unusual last night, though he was in the greenhouses until late. The scarf's been sent for examination, but there's no trace of blood or anything like that." "Thank you, Constable," Miss Marple said. "And the French windows in Lady Dorsett's room, were they forced?" Craddock shook his head. "No, miss. The latch is loose, but no signs of tampering. It's possible she opened them herself." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. "Possible indeed. And yet, a woman like Lady Dorsett, so particular about her belongings, would not leave her scarf or an earring behind carelessly." Craddock scratched his head. "That's what puzzles me, Miss Marple. It's like she meant to leave but changed her mind, or someone changed it for her." Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "I'd like to see the rose garden, if I may. Sometimes the smallest details tell the loudest stories." The garden was a vision of order and beauty, with neatly trimmed hedges and beds of roses in full bloom. The lavender scarf, now in Craddock's evidence bag, had been found near a cluster of pink tea roses, its delicate silk snagged on a thorn. Miss Marple bent to examine the spot, her fingers brushing the earth. It was soft, recently turned, but there were no clear footprints, only a faint indentation that might have been a heel. "Curious," she murmured, noting the faint tremor in the maid's hands. "You've been with Lady Dorsett a long time, haven't you, Elsie?" she asked. "Yes, miss. Nearly 10 years, Elsie replied, her eyes downcast. She was kind but strict. Expected things done just so. And last night, during this argument you overheard, did you catch any names?" Elsie hesitated, then shook her head. "No, miss. It was too dark and I was too far away. But Milady sounded upset, almost frightened." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Fear was a powerful motive, and in St. Mary Mead, where secrets grew like weeds, fear could lead to desperate acts. She thought of her own village, where a quarrel over a flower show prize had once revealed a deeper betrayal. People she knew were rarely what they seemed. As she prepared to leave, Arthur approached her, his cigarette now a stub. "Miss Marple, you'll find her, won't you? Aunt Amelia was the only one who believed in me." Miss Marple's smile was kind but guarded. "I shall do my best, Mr. Finley. Truth has a way of surfacing, like a bulb in spring." She stepped out into the fading light, the manor's silhouette looming against the sky. The village was quiet now, but Miss Marple knew that beneath its calm exterior, a storm was brewing. A letter, an argument, a scarf, these were clues, and she would follow them, stitch by stitch, until the pattern emerged. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Village. The late afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a soft amber glow, turning the thatched roofs of the cottages into golden halos and casting long shadows across the village green. Cricket stumps stood sentinel on the grass, abandoned for the day, while the distant lowing of cows from Farmer Giles's fields provided a soothing underscore to the day's unrest. Yet beneath this pastoral idyll, the disappearance of Lady Amelia Dorsett had set the village tongues wagging with the mingled scents of pipe tobacco, fresh loaves, and the faint, tangy whiff of cheese from the counter. Behind it stood Mrs. Archer, the shopkeeper, a stout woman in her 60s with a bun as tight as her opinions, doling out groceries and gossip in equal measure. As Miss Marple pushed open the door, the bell tinkled merrily, announcing her arrival. A small cluster of women gathered near the counter. Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, prominent among them, fell into a momentary hush before resuming their chatter at a pitch just loud enough to exclude the newcomer. Or so they thought. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Archer," Miss Marple said, her voice mild as milk. "A quarter-pound of Darjeeling, if you please, and perhaps some of those digestive biscuits, the ones with the extra crunch." Mrs. Archer nodded briskly, reaching for the tea caddy. "Afternoon, Miss Marple. Terrible business up at the manor, isn't it? Poor Lady Dorsett, vanished like a puff of smoke. My Tom's been up there with Constable Craddock, poking about in the bushes." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Indeed, a most perplexing affair. One does wonder what could have prompted such a sudden departure." The group by the counter shifted, drawing inexorably into the conversation like iron filings to a magnet. Mrs. Price, a plump matron in her 50s with cheeks like ripe apples and a floral dress that strained at the seams, seized the opportunity. She was the undisputed queen of village lore, her husband the vicar's position granting her a pulpit from which to dispense judgments wrapped in piety. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice a blend of sympathy and relish, "you've no idea the shock it's been. I was at the garden party myself last night. Such a lovely spread, with those cucumber sandwiches and the punch with the secret ingredient. Lady Dorsett was the picture of grace in her lavender silk, but mark my words, there was something amiss." Miss Marple selected a packet of biscuits, her movements deliberate. "Amiss, Mrs. Price? Do pray elaborate. One's observations at such gatherings can be most revealing." "At the manor, since Lord Dorsett was in short trousers. But Lady Amelia had that look about her, the one she gets when family matters crop up. And then, not an hour later, I saw Arthur Findlay slinking about the stables, looking like the cat that ate the cream. Or perhaps the one that didn't." The women tittered softly, and Miss Marple filed away the details. A quarrel with Hobbs, Arthur's furtive presence. Red herrings or genuine leads? In her experience, village quarrels were like hedgerows, full of berries, but one must discern the sweet from the sour. "Mr. Findlay does cut a dashing figure," she observed mildly. "Though I hear he's been troubled by London creditors." Mrs. Goodbody clucked her tongue. "Debt's deeper than the village well, they say. Lady Dorsett was his lifeline, promised to bail him out again. But what if she changed her mind? People do desperate things when money's tight." Miss Marple paid for her purchases, her smile serene. "Desperation is a shadow that follows many, but let us not cast it prematurely. Thank you, ladies. The tea smells divine, almost as inviting as your insights." As she exited the shop, basket in hand, the bell's tinkle seemed to release a fresh wave of speculation behind her. The high street bustled gently, a farmer leading a pony cart laden with hay, children skipping rote near the duck pond, the blacksmith's hammer ringing in rhythmic counterpoint. Miss Marple turned toward the vicarage garden, where she knew Mr. Hobbs might be found, tending the churchyard blooms as a side pursuit. The old gardener was a fixture of St. Mary Mead, his grizzled face etched with lines like furrows in a plowed field, his hands perpetually stained with the good earth. She found him kneeling by a bed of snapdragons, his tweed cap pulled low over tufts of white hair. A pipe dangled from his lips, sending lazy curls of smoke into the air. "Afternoon, Mr. Hobbs," Miss Marple greeted, her voice carrying over the hum of bees. "A fine day for the flowers, though the news from the manor casts a pall."
Hobbs grunted, rising stiffly to his feet and wiping his hands on his corduroy,
wreathing his face like a veil. Now that you say, aye, she did. Yesterday morning, early. A fellow from London, slick as a weasel in a city suit, asking after the greenhouses. Said he was a buyer for rare plants, but Milady sent him packing. No dealings with shady characters, she said. Looked fit to burst, he did. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. A London visitor. Could this tie to Arthur's debts, or something more sinister? Shady, you say? Did he give a name? Hobbs shook his head, tamping his pipe. Not to me. But Milady burned a letter after, in the potting shed. I saw the ashes, fancy paper, scented. Smelled like trouble. She thanked him, her mind alight with new threads. A rejected suitor, perhaps, or a creditor turned desperate. Hobbs returned to his snapdragons, muttering about meddlesome weeds, and Miss Marple continued her perambulations, her path leading her to the surgery of Dr. Haydock. The doctor's house, a neat Georgian terrace with a brass plate gleaming on the door, exuded an air of quiet competence. Dr. Haydock himself was a kindly gentleman in his late 50s, with a bushy beard that lent him the air of a benevolent Father Christmas, though his eyes held the keenness of a man who had seen life's frailties up close. He was just concluding a consultation when Miss Marple arrived, and his nurse ushered her into the consulting room, where the scent of carbolic soap mingled with the faint aroma of his favorite briar pipe. Miss Marple, Dr. Haydock boomed, rising from his desk with a warm handshake. What brings you to my den? Not ailing, I hope, your color's as good as ever. She settled into the leather armchair, declining his offer of a digestive. No ailments, doctor, save for a curiosity about our vanished lady. You attended the garden party, I believe? Haydock nodded, sinking back into his chair with a sigh. A fine evening, until this morning's shadow. Poor Amelia consulted me not 2 weeks past about a spot of insomnia. Doctor, I thought it fancy at the time. Miss Marple's needles, which she had begun to click idly, stilled. Poisons in a garden. Metaphor or clue? Idle indeed, but secrets have a way of blooming, doctor, like nightshade among the foxgloves. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, the upcoming harvest festival, the vicar's new sermon on charity, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere, weaving the day's gleanings into a nascent tapestry. The quarrel with Hobbs, the London visitor, the insomnia and the will. Each whisper added color, but the full picture eluded her still. As dusk began to gather, painting the sky in strokes of rose and indigo, Miss Marple made her way homeward. The village lamps flickered to life, their golden pools illuminating faces etched with concern. At her cottage gate she paused, inhaling the evening air scented with stock from her garden. Inside she lit the kettle for tea, settling by the window with her knitting. The village lay before her, a patchwork of lights and shadows. Worried, doctor? She murmured to the empty room, echoing her earlier question. About whom, indeed? People, she reflected, were like the whispers themselves, fleeting, yet potent. In St. Mary Mead, where every soul was known, the loudest secrets were often the quietest told. And as the church clock struck 6, its chimes rolling like gentle waves, Miss Marple knew the morrow would bring more revelations. For in mysteries such as this, patience was the finest thread of all. Chapter 4. Shadows of Doubt. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer shawl, softening the outlines of the village's thatched cottages and draping the meadows in a quiet mystery. The church spire pierced the haze, a steadfast beacon above the green, while the distant clatter of milk bottles and the cheerful whistle of the postman signaled the start of another day. Yet, beneath this serene surface, the enigma of Lady Amelia Dorsett's disappearance rippled through the village, unsettling its rhythms like a stone. Managed a wry smile, rubbing the back of his neck. "Morning, Miss Marple. Headway? More like wading through treacle. We've got a new lead, though. A scrap of paper found in the manor's study, tucked behind a bookcase. Looks like part of a note. Meet me at midnight. Urgent business. No signature, no address. It's got me wondering about young Arthur Finley. His alibi's thin as a wafer. Says he was driving to Lower Wycombe last night. Alone." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest as she adjusted her spectacles. "Midnight meetings are seldom innocent, Constable. May I see the note?" Craddock handed her a small evidence bag containing a torn fragment of paper, its edges singed as if someone had tried to burn it. The handwriting was bold, masculine, with ink smudged from hasty handling. "Curious," she murmured. "The paper is heavy, expensive, not the sort one uses for casual jottings. And the singeing suggests someone wanted it gone." "Exactly," Craddock said, leaning forward. "But why hide it behind a bookcase? Sloppy work for a cover-up, or deliberate misdirection," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but firm. "In my experience, people hide things where they wish them to be found." "Tell me about Arthur's alibi." Craddock sighed. "Says he drove to Lower Wycombe to meet a friend, but the friend, some chap named Reggie, claims he never showed. Arthur's car was seen back at the manor by 11, according to a stable hand. If he was meeting someone at midnight, it wasn't far off." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly as she drew them from her bag. "Young men in debt can be reckless, but let us not leap to conclusions. I think a chat with Mr. Finley might shed light." Leaving Craddock to his papers, she made her way to the Daffodil Inn, where Arthur Finley was lodging in a room above the public house. The inn, with its low beams and polished brass, nothing if I didn't shape up. But Aunt Amelia wouldn't do that. She promised. Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze gentle but piercing. "Promises are precious, Mr. Finley, but they can weigh heavily. Were you at the manor all evening?" Arthur flushed, his fingers drumming on the table. "I told Craddock I drove to Lower Wycombe, but Reggie wasn't there, so I came back. I was in my room by 11. Ask the stable hand." "I shall," she said, her tone soothing. "And this note about a midnight meeting. Any thoughts?" His eyes widened, then narrowed. "Midnight? I don't know anything about that. Sounds like something Aunt Amelia would have burned rather than kept." Miss Marple smiled faintly, noting his quick deflection. "Perhaps. People do act oddly when secrets are at stake." Leaving the inn, she reflected on Arthur's nervousness. A young man with much to lose, or perhaps to gain. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Price, ever eager to contribute to the village's narrative, was arranging flowers for Sunday's service. The vicarage garden was a riot of color, with dahlias and asters swaying in the breeze, and Mrs. Price, in a floral apron, wielded her secateurs with the precision of a surgeon. "Miss Marple!" she exclaimed, brushing a stray petal from her cheek. "You've been to the manor, I hear. Any news?" "Only questions, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple replied, admiring a particularly vivid dahlia. "I understand you saw Lady Dorsett at the garden party. Did anything strike you as unusual?" Mrs. Price's eyes lit up, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, since you ask, I did overhear something. Lady Amelia and I had a little chat by the fountain, just before the dancing started. She mentioned an old matter, something from years ago, a bit of a scandal, you know. I won't bore you with details, but it was about a certain gentleman who'd once been sweet on her. She laughed it off, but I could tell it rattled her. And then Elsie, that maid, pattern remained elusive. Back at the village hall, she found Craddock poring over witness statements. "Anything new, Miss Marple?" he asked, looking hopeful. "Only whispers, Constable," she replied, settling onto a bench. "But whispers have a way of growing louder. Have you spoken to Elsie Watkins again? She mentioned an argument in the garden." Craddock nodded, flipping through his notebook. "She did, but she's clammed up since. Says she didn't see who it was, only heard raised voices. I'm thinking of bringing her in for a proper interview." "Gently, Constable," Miss Marple advised. "Elsie's nervous but not deceitful. She may know more than she realizes." As she left the hall, the village clock struck noon, its chimes rolling across the green. Miss Marple's basket felt heavier now, not with goods but with the weight of questions. Arthur's debts, Elsie's eavesdropping, Mrs. Price's hints of scandal. These were not mere coincidences. They were shadows cast by a deeper truth, and Miss Marple knew that in St. Mary Mead, shadows often hid the sharpest thorns. She paused by the duck pond, watching ripples spread from a tossed pebble. "People are like ponds," she mused aloud. "Calm on the surface, but stir them, and all sorts of things rise up." With a determined nod, she turned toward home, her knitting needles ready to resume their quiet rhythm, each click a step closer to unraveling the mystery. Chapter 5. The Hidden Letter. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of gold and rose, as if determined to dispel the unease that had settled like dew upon its lanes. The chimneys of the cottages puffed gentle plumes of smoke, and the scent of freshly baked scones drifted from Mrs. Bunce's bakery, mingling with the fragrance of damp earth and blooming lavender. Yet, the tranquility of this 1952 summer day was but a veneer, for the disappearance of Lady Amelia Dorsett had woven a thread of disquiet through the village's heart. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat perched neatly atop her silver hair, walked briskly along the high street, her basket swinging lightly. Her mind, however, was far from the errands it appeared to contain. It was a loom, weaving the strands of gossip, observation, and fact into a pattern that grew clearer with each step. Her destination was Dorset Manor, where Constable Craddock had summoned her with news of a fresh discovery. The manor, with its ivy-clad walls and tall chimneys, stood proud yet somber, its windows reflecting the morning light like guarded eyes. As Miss Marple approached, She noted the gardeners at work, clipping hedges with mechanical precision, and the faint sound of a gramophone playing a melancholy waltz from within. The air carried a chill, despite the sun, as if the house itself mourned its mistress. Craddock met her at the door, his young face etched with a mixture of excitement and frustration. "Miss Marple, thank you for coming," he said, tipping his hat. "We found something in the library fireplace, a half-burned letter. It's a bit of a mess, but it might be important." Miss Marple's eyes brightened behind her spectacles. "A letter, you say? Elsie mentioned Lady Dorsett hiding one. Show me, Constable." He led her to the library, a grand room lined with oak shelves groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes. The fireplace, cold now, held a pile of ashes, from which Craddock's men had him in the drawing room, pacing before the French windows that overlook the rose garden. His mustache twitched as he turned to face them, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. "Miss Marple, Constable," he said, his voice hoarse. "Any news of Amelia?" "Perhaps, Lord Dorsett," Miss Marple replied, settling into a chintz armchair. "A letter has been found, partially burned, mentioning betrayal and inheritance. Do you know anything of it?" Lord Dorset's face paled, and he sank into a chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "A letter? No, I don't. Amelia handled her own correspondence. But inheritance. She was revising her will, as Dr. Haydock mentioned. She wanted to ensure the estate stayed intact." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly as she drew them from her bag. "Intact, you say? Yet such changes often stir unrest. Were you aware of her intentions?" He hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously. "She mentioned cutting back on certain bequests, Arthur's for one. He's been reckless, and I told her so. But I'd never harm her if that's what you're thinking. Her fortune was hers, inherited from her father. I manage the estate, but funds have been tight." Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to the window, as if seeking escape. "Tight indeed. Debt can make even the noblest heart falter." Craddock, standing by the fireplace, cleared his throat. "There's more, Miss Marple. We've had a report from Dr. Haydock. He says he saw old Hobbs, the gardener, near the manor at dusk last night, carrying a sack that looked heavy. Could be nothing, but with that argument Mrs. Price mentioned." Miss Marple's needles paused. "A sack? Most intriguing. Let us speak with Mr. Hobbs." They found the gardener in the greenhouse tending to Lady Dorset's prized orchids. The air was humid, thick with the scent of loam and exotic blooms, and Hobbs, his grizzled face set in a scowl, looked up as they entered. "You've been most helpful." As they left the greenhouse, Craddock whispered, "He's hiding something, I'd wager. That sack could have held anything. Tools. Or worse." "Patience, Constable," Miss Marple replied. "A gardener's sack is often just that. But the letter, its ashes speak louder than words." Their next stop was the manor's kitchen, where Elsie Watkins was polishing silver with a distracted air. Her apron was crisp, but her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. Miss Marple approached her gently, like one might a skittish foal. "Elsie, dear, you mentioned Lady Dorsett burning a letter. Did you see it clearly?" Elsie's hands trembled, and a spoon clattered to the table. "Not really, miss. It was in her desk, like I said."
She took it out, read it, and burned it in the library fireplace. I only saw it was on thick paper with a red wax seal. Looked important. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. A red wax seal. That's unusual these days. Did she say anything about its contents? Elsie shook her head, her voice barely audible. Only that it was trouble from the past. She was cross, miss, not like her usual self. Craddock scribbled in his notebook. Trouble from the past. Sounds like Mrs. Price's talk of a scandal. Could be connected. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts weaving new connections. A letter with a seal, burned in haste. A scandal hinted at by Mrs. Price. Lord Dorset's financial strain. And then there was the curious report of a woman resembling Lady Dorsett seen boarding a train to London, suitcase in hand, as relayed by a villager to Craddock that morning. A train sighting, she mused aloud. Yet her scarf and earring remain. A woman fleeing would take such treasures, wouldn't she? Craddock frowned. Unless she left in a hurry, or someone made it look that way. Precisely, Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their rhythm. We must consider what is shown and what is hidden, like a garden bed turned to conceal a weed. Leaving the manor, Miss Marple walked slowly through the rose garden, pausing where the cottage. She brewed a pot of Earl Grey and settled by the window, her knitting in her lap. The village spread before her, its rooftops glowing in the fading light. The letter, the sighting, the scuff mark. These were clues, but they were like stars in a daytime sky, visible only to those who knew where to look. Betrayal and inheritance, she repeated softly, echoing the burned words. Someone wanted those words silenced, but they've spoken all the same. The church clock struck 1, its chimes a gentle reminder of time's passage. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, each stitch a step toward clarity. In St. Mary Mead, where every face was familiar, the deepest secrets were often the most ordinary, hidden in plain sight like a letter in a fireplace or a scarf in a rose bush. Chapter 6. Twists in the Garden. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green and bathing the rolling hills in a golden haze. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming jasmine, and the distant chime of the church clock marked the passage of another tranquil hour in this summer of 1952. Yet, beneath the village's serene facade, the mystery of Lady Amelia Dorsett's disappearance stirred unease, like a faint ripple in a still pond. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, made her way back to Dorset Manor, her walking stick tapping softly on the gravel path. Her basket, ostensibly filled with knitting and a few apples from her garden, concealed the true purpose of her visit, to probe deeper into the puzzle that grew more intricate with each passing day. The manor's rose garden, a masterpiece of ordered beauty, drew her first. Its beds were a riot of color, crimson, blush, and creamy white, framed by neatly trimmed box hedges. The lavender scarf, now in Constable Craddock's evidence bag, had been found here, snagged on a thorn bush near the French windows of Lady Amelia's bedroom. Miss Marple paused at the spot, her keen eyes scanning the earth. The soil was soft from recent rain, but the faint indentation she'd noted earlier was joined by something new. Too neat, too contained. A real struggle would scatter more debris. Craddock frowned, jotting a note. But who'd go to such trouble, and why? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she drew them from her basket, her hands moving with the rhythm of thought. That, Constable, is what we must discover. Let us revisit the manor. Small things often speak loudly in familiar places.
Inside, the drawing room was quiet, its heavy curtains stirring in the breeze from the still-ajar French windows. Lord Henry Dorsett was absent, attending a meeting in the village, but Elsie Watkins was there, dusting a sideboard with a distracted air. Her mousy brown hair was tucked under a cap, and her hands moved mechanically, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. "Elsie, dear," Miss Marple said gently, settling into a chair. "You've had a trying few days. I wonder if you've recalled anything more about that argument you overheard in the garden." Elsie's cloth paused, and she glanced nervously at Craddock. "I've told you all I know, miss. It was dark and I was clearing plates. I heard Milady's voice, sharp-like, and someone else, but I couldn't make out who. Something about promises broken, that's all I caught." Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her question was precise. "And the letter you saw her burn, did it have a scent, perhaps, like the lavender Mr. Hobbs mentioned?" Elsie's eyes widened, and she nodded hesitantly. "Aye, now you mention it, it did smell of lavender. Like her perfume, or maybe her writing paper. She was particular about such things." Craddock scribbled furiously, but Miss Marple's attention shifted to a small tea table nearby. A single teacup sat there, its saucer faintly damp, and a subtle bitter scent lingered, not tea, but something medicinal. She leaned closer, her nose wrinkling. "Laudanum, perhaps," she murmured. "A curious choice for afternoon tea." Elsie gasped, her cloth dropping. "Laudanum? Oh, miss, that wasn't there yesterday. Milady never took such things, not unless Dr. Haydock prescribed it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "In price," Miss Marple replied, accepting a cup of tea. "You mentioned a scandal at the garden party. I wonder if you could elaborate." Mrs. Price's eyes gleamed with the thrill of gossip. "Well, since you insist, it was an old story, from before Lady Amelia married Lord Henry. A gentleman, name escapes me, courted her fiercely, but her father disapproved. There was talk of an elopement that never happened, and some say it broke her heart. At the party, she brought it up, almost teasing, but I could tell it stung. And then she argued with me, about the flower show. Said my dahlias were no match for her roses. The cheek." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind noting the edge in Mrs. Price's tone. "Jealousy over flowers can run deep in a village, can't it? Did anyone else overhear this?" Mrs. Price sniffed. Elsie was lurking as usual, and Arthur was nearby, looking shifty. I wouldn't put it past him to stir trouble. He's always after money. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically. Money is a powerful spur, but so is pride. "Thank you, Mrs. Price. Your dahlias, by the way, are quite splendid." Leaving the vicarage, Miss Marple reflected on the web of motives: Arthur's debts, Mrs. Price's rivalry, Elsie's nervous silences. The laudanum was a new thread, suggesting a deliberate act, sedation perhaps, to facilitate a disappearance. But was Lady Amelia a victim, or had she orchestrated her own exit? The train sighting, reported by Mrs. Goodbody, lingered in her mind, a possible red herring. She returned to the manor's garden, drawn back to the trampled roses. Kneeling again, she noticed something overlooked before. A tiny sliver of fabric, not silk but coarse cotton, caught on a thorn. It was gray, like the aprons worn by the manor staff. Elsie, perhaps, she mused, tucking it into her handkerchief. Or someone clever enough to mimic her. Craddock joined her, his face flushed from a brisk walk. "Because someone trampled the roses, and it wasn't by chance. And a teacup smells of laudanum. Most unusual, don't you think? His face paled and he stubbed out his cigarette. Laudanum. I don't know anything about that. Aunt Amelia was fine when I saw her last. Was she? Miss Marple asked, her voice soft as a whisper. Or was she troubled by promises, broken or otherwise? Arthur turned away, muttering about needing air. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloguing his unease. The garden, the teacup, the fabric sliver, these were not random. They were stitches in a pattern, and she was beginning to see its shape. As evening fell, the village settled into a quiet hush, broken only by the hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, lighting the lamp by her window. She brewed a pot of chamomile tea, its scent soothing her thoughts. The laudanum was key. Sedation suggested intent, perhaps to move Lady Amelia without resistance. But to where? And by whom? She opened her knitting, her needles moving in time with her reflections. People are like gardens, she murmured to the empty room. They bloom, they wither, and sometimes they're uprooted entirely. But the roots always tell the tale. The church clock struck 6, its chimes rolling over the village like a lullaby. Miss Marple knew the truth was close, hidden in the twists of the garden and the shadows of the manor. Chapter 7. Unraveling Threads. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns across the cobblestone lanes and thatched roofs of the village. It was a crisp summer day in 1952, with the air scented by dewy grass and the faint sweetness of blooming honeysuckle. The village green bustled gently. Children chased a hoop near the duck pond, and the postman's whistle echoed as he made his rounds. Yet beneath this idyllic calm, the mystery of Lady Amelia Dorsett's disappearance hung like a storm cloud, its shadows lengthening with each passing hour. Miss Jane. Time. We found something in Lady Dorsett's bedroom, a diary, hidden under a floorboard beneath her dressing table. It's locked, but there's a page torn out, and the entries we can read mention fears and someone close. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles as she took the diary, its cover worn but elegant, embossed with a faint floral pattern. A diary, Constable? How intriguing. People pour their truths into such pages, often truths they dare not speak aloud. Have you tried the lock? Craddock shook his head. It's a tricky little thing. Needs a key we haven't found. But the torn page suggests someone got to it first. Could be tied to that burned letter. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tracing the diary's edges. Indeed. A torn page, a burned letter. Someone is very keen to silence Lady Amelia's words. Let us speak with Lord Dorset. He may know more than he realizes. They found Lord Henry Dorset in the conservatory, surrounded by potted ferns and the faint hum of bees from the open windows. His mustache twitched nervously as he clipped a wilting leaf, his hands betraying a tremor. Miss Marple, Constable, he said, his voice strained. This is a nightmare without end. A diary now? Amelia was private, but I never thought she'd hide something like that. Miss Marple settled onto a wicker chair, her knitting needles clicking softly. Privacy, Lord Dorset, is often a shield for worry. The diary mentions fears, perhaps of betrayal, as the burned letter suggested. Did Lady Amelia confide any such concerns? Lord Dorset's face flushed, and he set down his clippers with a clatter. She was distant lately. I'll admit we had our troubles. I had an indiscretion, a brief affair with an actress in London. Amelia found out through a telegram I was careless with. She forgave me, or so I thought,
but she spoke of changing her will, ensuring the estate went to worthy hands. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. Worthy hands? That's a telling phrase. And this telegram, where is it now? He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. Was dusted with flour, and her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying again. Miss Marple, she said, wiping her hands, I don't know what more I can tell you. I'm sick with worry over m'lady. Miss Marple's tone was soothing, like a warm shawl. You've been loyal, Elsie, and that's to your credit. But small details matter. That teacup with laudanum. Did you prepare Lady Amelia's tea that evening? Elsie's hands froze, and she looked away. I did, miss, but I swear it was just tea. I left it on her table before the party. If there was laudanum, someone else put it there. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her question was precise. And did you notice anything else? Perhaps something missing from the manor? Elsie's cheeks flushed, and she twisted her apron. Well, I shouldn't say, but m'lady caught me taking a silver spoon once. For my mother. She's ill, and we needed money for medicine. M'lady was kind, said she'd overlook it, but she warned me to stop. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the confession. Kindness can mask suspicion, Elsie. Did she mention anyone else troubling her? Elsie shook her head, her voice barely audible. Only that she feared someone close. Someone who'd let her down. She didn't say who. Craddock, standing by the door, raised an eyebrow. Sounds like the diary. Maybe Arthur. He's the one with debts. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Perhaps, Constable. But fear is a broad net, it catches many. Let us visit Mr. Hobbs again. The gardener was in the potting shed, sorting packets of seeds with a meticulous hand. His pipe, unlit, dangled from his lips, and his eyes narrowed as Miss Marple and Craddock approached. More questions, eh? He grunted. I've told you all I know. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. Just a small matter, Mr. Hobbs. Constable Craddock mentioned you buying rope at the village shop recently. For trellises, I presume. A barrier or a lure. Back at the manor, Craddock shared another lead. A villager had reported seeing a shadowy figure near the riverbank at dawn, carrying what looked like a bundle. Could be nothing, he said, but it's near where the roses were trampled. Miss Marple's mind raced, weaving the new clues. The diary's fears, Lord Dorsett's affair, Elsie's theft, Hobbs's rope, Arthur's nocturnal wanderings. The laudanum teacup suggested a deliberate act, sedation to facilitate a quiet exit, perhaps to the river. But the train sighting, now seeming more like a staged distraction, muddied the waters. She returned to the rose garden, her steps slow and deliberate. The trampled beds were unchanged, but she noticed a faint glint in the soil. A tiny glass vial, half buried, its stopper missing. She knelt, careful not to disturb it, and sniffed cautiously. Laudanum, she confirmed, her voice low. Dropped in haste, perhaps. Craddock bagged the vial, his eyes wide. This ties to the teacup. Someone drugged her, Miss Marple. Someone in the house. Or someone with access, she corrected. We must tread carefully, Constable. The truth is like a rose. It blooms only when the time is right. As evening approached, the village settled into a quiet glow, its lamps flickering like stars. Miss Marple walked home, her basket heavier with the weight of new questions. At her cottage, she lit the lamp and brewed a pot of Earl Grey, settling by the window with her knitting. The diary, the vial, the rope marks, these were threads, and she was close to seeing their pattern. "Fear," she murmured, echoing the diary's words. "It drives us to desperate acts, but it also leaves traces." The church clock struck 7, its chimes rolling over St. Mary Mead like a gentle tide. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, each stitch a step toward clarity. In a village where secrets grew like weeds, the truth was never far from the surface. It only required the right hand to unearth it. Chapter 8. The nap grew sharper with each passing hour. Her destination was Dorset Manor, where Constable Craddock awaited, with updates on the investigation. The manor stood grandly, its ivy-clad walls and tall windows reflecting the sunlight like a mirror of secrets. The rose garden, where Lady Amelia's lavender scarf had been found, was quiet now, its trampled blooms a silent testament to the drama that had unfolded. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of beeswax polish and old roses, but an undercurrent of tension lingered, as if the house itself sensed the weight of hidden truths. Craddock met her in the drawing room, his young face etched with determination. A table held a tray of tea, untouched, and a stack of reports, including the analysis of the laudanum vial found in the garden. "Miss Marple," he greeted, pushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "The vial's confirmed. It's laudanum, same as the teacup. Someone drugged Lady Dorsett, no question. And we've checked alibis. Dr. Haydock's solid. His patient, old Mrs. Cleary, swears he was with her until midnight, tending a fever. Mrs. Price was at choir practice, vouched for by half the village. That leaves Arthur Finley, Elsie Watkins, and old Hobbs in the frame." Miss Marple settled into a chintz armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly. "A narrowing circle, Constable. The laudanum suggests intent. Someone wanted Lady Amelia pliable, perhaps to move her quietly. Let us revisit the alibis and the diary's clues." Craddock handed her the diary, still locked but with a few pages legible through a loosened binding. The entry spoke of a deceitful relative and fears of being silenced. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. A relative. Arthur, perhaps? His debts are a heavy burden, and Lady Amelia's will was a lifeline. They sought Arthur Finley first, finding him in the manor's billiard room, idly tapping a cue against the green baize. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, and his cigarette trembled slightly in his hand. "Party. Check with the stable hand." Craddock nodded. "We did. He confirms you were back by 11, but that leaves an hour unaccounted for before midnight, when the note suggested a meeting." Arthur's hands clenched. "I don't know about any meeting. I was in my room, I swear." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Swearing is easy, Mr. Finley. Truth is harder. The laudanum in the teacup. Did you have access to your aunt's tea?" His eyes widened, and he stepped back. "Laudanum? I wouldn't know where to get it. I'm not a chemist." Miss Marple smiled faintly, filing away his agitation. "No, but desperation finds a way." "Thank you, Mr. Finley." Next, they sought Elsie Watkins, who was polishing silver in the pantry, her movements slow and deliberate. Her face was pale, her apron twisted in her fingers, and her eyes darted nervously as Miss Marple approached.
Elsie dear, Miss Marple began, her voice soothing. The diary speaks of fears. Did Lady Amelia ever mention being afraid of someone close? Elsie's hands trembled, and a fork slipped to the table with a clink. She was worried, miss. That much I knew. Said someone was pressing her, wanting more than their share. I thought she meant Mr. Arthur, always asking for money he was. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. And the gray fabric we found in the garden, similar to your apron. Were you there that night? Elsie gasped, her cheeks flushing. The garden? No, miss, I was clearing up after the party, then in my quarters. I swear I didn't go near the roses. Craddock interjected, holding up a sketch of the fabric sliver. It's coarse cotton, like the staff aprons. Could be a coincidence, but we're testing it for traces. Elsie's eyes filled with tears. I'd never harm a lady. She was kind. Even when she caught me taking that spoon, I only did it from my mother's medicine. Miss Marple patted her hand. Loyalty is a virtue, Elsie, but secrets can weigh heavy. Did you see anyone else need bundle? Hobbs's scowl deepened. Bundle? Just my tools, taking 'em to the shed. I was by the river to check the irrigation ditch, Milady's orders. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but piercing. And the laudanum vial in the garden, any knowledge of it? Hobbs shook his head. Vial? Never seen it. I stick to my plants, not potions. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind cataloging the alibis. Dr. Haydock's patient confirmed his presence. Mrs. Price's choir practice held firm. Hobbs's rope was plausibly explained. Arthur and Elsie remained, their stories fraying at the edges. But a new clue beckoned. Footprints near the riverbank, reported by a villager who'd walked his dog at dawn. They were small, too delicate for a man, leading from the garden to the water's edge. She returned to the riverbank with Craddock, the grass soft underfoot and the water glinting like polished silver. The footprints were faint but clear, a woman's size, pressed into the mud. Not Lady Amelia's, Miss Marple murmured, comparing them to a sketch of her shoe size. Someone lighter, perhaps. And no return prints, suggesting they left another way. Craddock crouched, examining the tracks. Could be Elsie, she's petite, or Mrs. Price out for her stroll. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Or someone clever enough to mimic them. The laudanum, the footprints, the diary. They point to a plan, Constable. Someone wanted Lady Amelia gone, and they covered their tracks well. As they walked back to the manor, the village was settling into midday, with children playing on the green and the scent of baking bread wafting from the bakery. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the riverbank footprints. They were a deliberate clue, like the trampled roses, suggesting a staged scene, or a real one, carefully concealed. Arthur's nervous tick, Elsie's tearful confession, Mrs. Price's furtive stroll, each added a stitch to the pattern. At her cottage, Miss Marple brewed a pot of chamomile tea, settling by the window with her knitting. This tranquil facade. The mystery of Lady Amelia Dorsett's disappearance pulsed like a hidden heartbeat, its resolution drawing near. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat exchanged for a simple shawl against the evening chill, walked purposefully toward Dorset Manor. Her basket, tucked under her arm, held her knitting, but her mind was a finely tuned instrument, weaving together the clues that had emerged over days of quiet observation. A laudanum-laced teacup, a hidden diary, a burned letter, trampled roses, rope marks, a sliver of gray fabric, and delicate footprints by the riverbank.
Today, in the Manor's drawing room, she would lay bare the truth. The Manor loomed grandly, its ivy-clad walls absorbing the fading light. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The scent of polished wood and wilting roses mingling with the faint tang of nervous anticipation. Constable Craddock had gathered the key figures: Lord Henry Dorsett, Arthur Findlay, Elsie Watkins, Mrs. Price and Mr. Hobbs, in the drawing room, at Miss Marple's request. The French windows stood closed now, their curtains drawn, casting the room in a soft, shadowed glow. A silver tea tray sat on a side table, its cups untouched, as if the household dared not break the spell of the moment. Miss Marple stood near the fireplace, her small figure commanding the room with quiet authority. Her blue eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, swept over the assembled group. Lord Dorsett sat stiffly, his mustache twitching. Arthur fidgeted with a cigarette, unlit. Elsie twisted her apron, her face pale. Mrs. Price clutched a handkerchief, her cheeks flushed. And Hobbs, his pipe tucked in his pocket, glowered from a corner. Craddock stood by the door, his notebook ready, his young face taut with expectation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miss Marple began, her voice calm but resonant. "We are here to resolve the mystery of Lady Amelia Dorsett's disappearance. It is a puzzle of human nature, as all such mysteries are. And the deception." Arthur's cigarette fell to the floor and he scrambled to pick it up. "Drugged? That's absurd. I'd never—" "Miss Marple, you can't think I'd harm Aunt Amelia." Mrs. Price gasped, her handkerchief fluttering. "Arthur, how dare you raise your voice? Though I must say your debts were no secret." Miss Marple's needles, resting in her lap, glinted as she leaned forward. "Mr. Findlay, your debts indeed gave you motive. Lady Amelia's diary mentions a deceitful relative, and your alibi, a drive to Lower Wickham, crumbles under scrutiny. The stable hand saw you near the garden, not in your room, at 11. And yet, I believe you loved your aunt, in your way." Arthur's face crumpled and he sank back, silent. Miss Marple turned to Elsie, whose hands trembled violently. "Elsie, dear, you confessed to taking a spoon for your mother's medicine, a small theft forgiven by Lady Amelia. But you heard an argument in the garden, and the gray fabric in the roses matches your apron. Were you there?" Elsie's eyes filled with tears. "No, miss, I swear. I was in the kitchen after the party, then my quarters. I'd never hurt m'lady. She was kind to me." Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle. "I believe you, Elsie. Your loyalty shines through, despite your fears. But someone wore an apron like yours, or left it to be found." Hobbs grunted, his arms crossed. "This is nonsense. I tied the gate with rope to stop it banging, not to trap anyone. And that bundle by the river? My tools, nothing more." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to him. "Your rope, Mr. Hobbs, matches the marks on the gate, but I accept it was for gardening. Your devotion to Lady Amelia's orchids speaks to your character. No, the truth lies elsewhere." All eyes turned to Mrs. Price, who stiffened, her handkerchief clutched like a shield. "Miss Marple, surely you don't suspect me. I was at choir practice, and I barely knew Lady Amelia's secrets." Amelia to the river, drugged and pliable. And there, tragedy struck.
Mrs. Price's handkerchief fell, and she gripped the armrests.
"Tragedy? You think I killed her?"
Miss Marple's voice softened, but her words were firm.
I believe you meant only to frighten her, Mrs. Price. The scandal you mentioned was not just hers, it was yours. Years ago, you loved the same man, and Lady Amelia's family outbid yours for his hand. The wound festered, fed by her wealth and status, which you envied. When she spoke of it at the party, laughing, it reignited your pain. You slipped laudanum into her tea, led her to the river to confront her, and in a moment of panic, she fell, or was pushed. The river took her, and you staged the garden to suggest abduction.
The room was silent, save for Elsie's stifled sob. Mrs. Price's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I didn't mean to kill her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just wanted her to feel small, like I did all those years. The laudanum was to make her listen, to confess her cruelty. But she stumbled, fell into the water. I couldn't save her." Craddock stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm.
Mrs. Price, I'm afraid you'll need to come with me. We'll need a full statement.
Lord Dorset's face was ashen, his voice a whisper.
Amelia, dead? Because of jealousy?
Arthur's cigarette fell again, unheeded, as he stared at Mrs. Price.
You let me take the blame. All this time.
Miss Marple's gaze was kind but resolute. Jealousy, Mr. Finley, is a poison stronger than laudanum. It clouds the heart, as it did Mrs. Price's. But the truth always surfaces, like a flower through the earth. Craddock led Mrs. Price away, her sobs echoing in the silent room. The others sat stunned, the weight of the revelation settling like dust. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her small figure a beacon of quiet strength. "Human nature," she said softly, "is predictable."
Dramatic revelation of her tragic fate. St. Mary Mead was slowly returning to its familiar rhythms, like a river finding its course after a flood. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed skirt brushed and her straw hat set aside, sat in her cozy parlor, a pot of Earl Grey steaming on the table before her. Her knitting needles rested in her lap, their gentle clicking a counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. Today, she had invited Constable Craddock and a few others to her cottage for tea, to tie up the loose ends of the mystery and restore the village's peace. The parlor was a haven of comfort, its walls adorned with faded floral wallpaper and shelves lined with well-loved books. A vase of sweet peas, picked from her garden, perfumed the air, and a plate of Mrs. Bunce's scones, still warm from the bakery, sat beside a dish of clotted cream and raspberry jam. Miss Marple's windows overlooked the high street, where villagers went about their morning tasks. Mrs. Archer sweeping the shop doorstep, children skipping toward the schoolhouse, and the postman whistling as he delivered letters. Yet, the memory of yesterday's confrontation in Dorset Manor lingered, a shadow that her gathering aimed to dispel. Constable Craddock arrived first, his young face weary but relieved. He removed his hat and settled into a cushioned chair, accepting a cup of tea with a grateful nod. "Miss Marple," he said, stirring in a lump of sugar. "I don't know how you do it. Mrs. Price confessed everything last night. Full details, just as you laid out. She's with the magistrate now, and the coroner's searching the river for Lady Amelia." Miss Marple's blue eyes softened behind her spectacles. Poor Mrs. Price. Jealousy is a cruel master, Constable, and it led her to a terrible act. But the truth, like a garden weed, always finds its way to the light. Craddock sipped his tea, his notebook tucked away for once. You saw it all. The teacup, the footprints, the diary. Lightens it. Your wife was a remarkable woman, and her memory will endure in St. Mary Mead.
Lord Dorsett took the cup, his hands trembling slightly.
I was a fool, Miss Marple. That affair in London, I thought it was nothing, a fleeting mistake. But Amelia knew, and it hurt her deeply. If I'd been more attentive, perhaps.
Miss Marple's gaze was kind but firm.
Regret is a companion to us all, Lord Dorsett. But your wife's fate was not your doing. Mrs. Price's actions were born of her own heart, not yours.
Arthur Findlay arrived next, his usual swagger subdued. His suit was pressed, but his eyes were red-rimmed, as if he'd spent the night wrestling with his conscience. He hesitated at the door, then stepped inside, nodding to Craddock and his uncle.
Miss Marple, he said, his voice rough, I thought you'd have me in handcuffs yesterday. Thank you for seeing I didn't. I couldn't.
Miss Marple gestured to a chair, her smile warm.
You loved your aunt, Mr. Findlay, despite your troubles. Debts can cloud judgment, but your heart was true. Perhaps this is a chance to mend your ways, for her memory.
Arthur sank into the chair, accepting a scone with a faint smile.
I'm done with London, Miss Marple. I've spoken to Uncle Henry. He's offered me a job managing the estate. A fresh start.
Lord Dorsett nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes.
Amelia would have wanted that. She always believed in you, Arthur.
Elsie Watkins was the last to arrive, her apron replaced by a simple dress, her face pale but composed. She clutched a small handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously until Miss Marple's gentle pat on her arm steadied her.
Elsie, dear, Miss Marple said, pouring her tea. You've been brave through this ordeal. Your loyalty to Lady Amelia shone through, even in your fear.
Elsie's voice trembled.
I still can't believe it, Miss. Mrs. Price, of all people. I thought she was just a gossip.
Haste. Lord Dorsett's voice was barely audible.
And the diary. Her fears. She sensed danger, Miss Marple said gently. The diary spoke of a deceitful relative, which we thought was Arthur. But it was her fear of betrayal in a broader sense. Old wounds reopened by Mrs. Price's barbed words at the party. The burned letter, forged to mimic her hand, was Mrs. Price's attempt to muddy the waters, suggesting Lord Dorsett's affair as a motive. Arthur's hands clenched, then relaxed. I thought I'd lost everything, her trust, her help. But you saw through it, Miss Marple. Miss Marple's smile was kind. People are like gardens, Mr. Findlay. They can be tended back to health with care. You've a chance to grow anew. Elsie sipped her tea, her eyes brimming. Milady was so kind, even when I took that spoon. I'll never forget her. Miss Marple patted her hand. Kindness leaves a legacy, Elsie. You'll carry it forward. The conversation turned to lighter matters, the upcoming harvest festival, the cricket match planned for Sunday. But the weight of the truth lingered, softened by the warmth of the parlor. Outside, St. Mary Mead hummed with life. The blacksmith's hammer rang. Children laughed by the duck pond.
and the scent of baking bread drifted on the breeze. The village was healing, its rhythms restored like a melody after a discord. As her guests departed, Miss Marple walked them to the gate, her shawl draped over her shoulders. Lord Dorsett paused, his voice thick. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You've given us closure, if not comfort." "Closure is a step toward peace," she replied, her eyes gentle. "Cherish her memory, and let it guide you." Arthur lingered, his expression earnest. "I'll make her proud, Miss Marple. No more debts. No more trouble." She nodded, her smile encouraging. "I believe you will, Mr. Finley." Elsie, clutching her handkerchief, Marple poured another cup of tea, her heart content. The village was at peace, its secrets laid bare, and her work, for now, was done.